Wanted to welcome in guest Josh White. Josh, how's it going?
Good, Chris. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good. I'm excited about the season, and I definitely wanted to talk about it. And I immediately went right to you. And there's so much to get to, Josh. There's some, newcomers, lineups, all kinds of stuff. I want to get right into kind of the big news. I feel like was the starting rotation was named. Gino going with Daniel Fetterman the first day, then Alejandro Rosario and Victor Maderos, two freshmen the next 2 days. What was your reaction to that news? There was obviously a lot of guys in the mix there.
Well, obviously they lost a lot of guys from last year, losing Brian Van Bell, Slade Ciccone, and Chris McMahon, all signing minor league contracts. Obviously, McMahon and Ciccone getting drafted. They also lost Tyler Kaiser, which I don't think a lot of people really think, which could have played a part in this season as well if he came back. Fetterman's not a surprise to me. I think he was almost, I don't want to say guaranteed a spot in the rotation, but it seems likely that as a fourth-year guy who has some experience starting, he was a logical fit to be in the weekend rotation. Obviously, I think the talent for Rosario and Medeiros is off the charts, and that's undeniable. But very rarely, especially at a school like Miami, will you see a true freshman start opening weekend. It happens sometimes later in the season, but very rarely opening weekend. It hasn't happened since Brian Radzewski in 2011, and obviously B-Rad had a great career at Miami. So I think the talent for Medeiros and Rosario is there. I'm sure they pitched extremely well. Obviously, we couldn't see anything this year compared to years in the past. Based on all the claims we heard, Rosario was extremely consistent. Medeiros kind of turned it on as of late. The one, I don't know if it's an area of concern or the one question mark, and again, we saw none of it, so we don't really know, is a guy like Jake Smith, who came in as a highly touted guy at a junior college, was a draft prospect even last year. He's not in that rotation. And that's maybe it's not a knock on Jake Smith. Maybe he just got outperformed and he pitched well. It's something we don't know. I'm curious to see who that fourth guy is. There's so many different options, whether it is Jake Smith, whether it is Alex McFarland, who, the potential is there for him, who got off to a little bit of a rocky start in the shortened season last year. Jake Garland was excellent last year. He could be an option. So I think when it came down to it, this is not a 1 week decision for Gino DiMaria and JD Arteaga. This is what gives us the best chance to win, not just this week, but moving forward. And they felt that Rosario and Medeiros are there now, and that potential is there. So it was worth it to go with those two guys.
And I think that's what stands out to me with their talent. Coaches talked about that when we spoke to them this week. They both talked about elite talent. And I think if you've anyone in South Florida that's been following, recruiting high school baseball the last few years, these two guys were highly regarded ever since you started looking up lists. Both of these guys probably, I think even before high school, that these are two guys that have always stood out. And, Perfect Game had Rosario, number 24 prospect in the recruiting class, Medeiros, number 34. So these are elite arms, 95-mile-an-hour fastballs and higher. I think, and certainly, Josh, freshmen don't necessarily perform right away and immediately. And if I were to pick, I think Rosario is going to have one of those huge years. Cesar Carrillo had one of those monster years in the year after he was able to play, but we've seen it. Chris Hernandez had a good freshman year. You mentioned Radzewski. There's been guys that have done well as freshmen starting pitching. I think Rosario is going to be, again, we've not seen a lot, but based on things hearing, his high school stuff, just getting to know his demeanor a little bit, I think he's going to have one of those big years. And I honestly think he's going to pitch well against Florida in the opener. And I'm with you in the sense that I'm very curious to see how that starting rotation plays out. I'm also curious as to what happens if one of those guys struggles early. Are they going to make a quick fix because you can? Jake Smith is that next guy, or at least they didn't name the number 4 guy, but certainly the guy that you're like looking at is, he's a top 200 draft prospect coming into the year. He's another guy with a big arm, a little bit more experience from that junior college ranks. Is he going to be right there pushing guys? And I think we'll see it. And I think they have that flexibility. And that's one of the things that, JD Arteaga talked about with the bullpen. They feel like they can kind of go to guys. I think that they're going to ride these guys out, both power arms. And it's going to be very interesting to see with those pitchers. And kind of moving on to that, the closer role, it was kind of interesting. So Gino DiMaria did not come right out and say it, but when JD talked, it was Carson. And not only did he talk about how Carson was, but just how good he's been. Like he really, didn't shy away with how good he's been. And I want to get your take on that. Kind of looking at Carson as the closer, and then kind of go Gates as a left-handed setup and Wenger as a right-handed setup, and maybe how that back end plays out with the bullpen.
Yeah, I think their bullpen set up really nicely. We haven't really seen that in the last few years. Obviously, the last dominant closer Miami had was really Brian Garcia, and that's been a few years. Greg Veliz was pretty good for a little while. Frankie Bartow had his moments as well. Like those two guys got the job done, but they haven't had that closer that when you know that guy comes in the game, the game's over since Garcia. And I think Palmquist has that potential. Obviously, a completely different pitcher than Brian Garcia, but when we saw Palmquist in very limited moments last year, after those first 6 or 7 games he sat out, he was great. It's just so hard to hit, being 6'4", throwing from that angle. He gets a lot of comps to Chris Sale, and I know that's high praise because Chris Sale's pitched so many years in the big leagues and he's been so dominant. But he has that type of stuff, the arm slot he throws from, the velocity, the breaking balls. I'm sure he pitched really, really well. It doesn't surprise me that he was in that conversation. Does it surprise me a little bit that he beat out a guy like Wenger just because of Wenger's experience and track record? Absolutely. And I think that's a really good sign. I don't think it was because Wenger was disappointing. I'm sure Wenger was that kind of steady hand that Miami expected him to be. I just think Palmquist probably outcompeted him. So that's really good news, obviously, for Miami on the back end. You mentioned JP Gates and Wenger as those two setup guys. It gives them a lot of flexibility. They've advertised Wenger as being that, lockdown guy in the back end. And the key that I heard when I was just like kind of reading the stuff from, the fall and heading into the season was it's not just against right-handed batters either. Yeah. It's both sides. And JP Gates was the same way last year as well. So I think that gives them a lot of flexibility, especially with those 3 guys who have done it at this level. I think that's huge. And even beyond that, they have guys that can kind of bridge it to those 3 on the back end.
And there's a lot to talk about with the pitching. I think one of the reasons why I wanted to start with is just because it's a little bit of the question mark in terms of you lose your top 3 starters. So, are they going to take that drop off? And I think in the preseason rankings, some teams, some polls, Miami's top 10, but, D1 baseball has them 21. So I think there are a little bit of question marks, but I think, Josh, when we're speaking about this, there's a lot of arm talent there. And like I said, I expect Rosario to have a good season as a young guy. I think Madero certainly can do that as well. And then they have all these options, and JD almost seemed, really happy that he's got these options in the bullpen, and we'll see how it plays out. But certainly you like those guys at the back end. And I think not just Palmquist being able to pitch to righties and lefties, but, they could go match up with Gates and Wenger, something that they certainly haven't had at that level. Obviously Gates did well last year, but, to have a couple guys in the back end to really go through some lineups certainly gives them some flexibility. Josh, I feel like we could talk about pitching all day long, but I want to get to the hitters because there's certainly a lot of excitement there. Let's just start off with the top 2 hitters on the team, with Alex Terrell and Adrian Del Castillo. And I know you had questions about Adrian to coach there, and I want to kind of get your take on Adrian. Again, most mock drafts are having him as a first-round pick this year. Why is that? And I think one of the things that you asked was just about the improvement. So just kind of curious your thoughts on Adrian and what can we see more of possibly this year.
It was just a memory that I had that I was talking to Gino before Adrian Del Castillo even took a college at bat. And he said, this kid is going to leave here as one of the best players in program history. And I'm thinking to myself, think about all the other guys that have walked in. This kid's good. He had a really great high school career, had a chance to, get drafted out of high school, elected to come to Miami. And I'm thinking, I go, okay, this kid could be really good. But Gino, he's never taken a college at bat. You just don't know. Oh, he was right. 100% he was right. And this kid is that good. He's one of the toughest guys to strike out in college baseball. He is just a good old school type of hitter. No batting gloves, will rub dirt on his hands. He does everything you could imagine. Really a gap-to-gap hitter. That power's kind of built up, especially towards the end of his freshman year. You started to see it more. He didn't hit too many home runs early last year, but he's impossible to get out. He does everything with the bat. I think defense took a step forward as a sophomore last year. We didn't see him catch much as a freshman, just kind of spell Amditas here and there. But he was the everyday catcher pretty much most games last year. Obviously, we saw him in right field a bunch his freshman year. But that's the type of kid he is. He's willing to just get on the field anywhere he can. He's a 2-time captain, which you don't really see too often, especially guys who are only going to be here 3 years. Rare to be a captain as a sophomore. Everyone loves that kid on that team. There's so much you can say about him that there's a reason why, first off, he's going to be a first-round pick because of his play on the field. But I think you talk to anyone and probably includes the janitor at that place, and they're going to tell you how much they love that kid.
Absolutely. And one of the things that struck me, talked about the no batting gloves and guy that's been able to hit, and just talking to some people. And I remember watching him in high school at Gulliver, went to one of his practice. He hit 2 bombs out. I saw him do well in games. It felt like every one of those guys that every time, I didn't see him a ton, but every time I saw him, he just did really well. But he's one of those guys that basically around the community, people said, this guy's been hitting since he was 5 years old. Since he's picked up the bat. Like he's just a natural, really good hitter. And I think that's going to be certainly obviously key for Miami. And that's one of the reasons why I think this Miami team can be really good, because you do have that elite bat in there that can hit for average. So you mentioned the gap to gap power, can hit home runs. That's improving. But the doubles, I love seeing when guys rake up doubles. It's my favorite thing in baseball, to be honest with you, as a hitter. With Alex Terrell, kind of moving on to him, and I didn't get a chance to ask him. We had kind of limited amount of questions, but I definitely want to get more with Alex. But one of the things that we saw, and certainly made that big jump from freshman to sophomore year, all the production numbers and everything. But going into last year, one thing that struck me as like a major improvement was his strikeout rate. Really cut down on that, because I felt like that's a good number. That's definitely a way to improve. And just kind of feeling like the next step for Alex, what are some things that maybe you see that going into this year that, we saw the big home run numbers. Are you expecting one of those big years again? And then maybe some things that you think maybe Alex could do a little bit better than he's done these first 3 seasons at Miami?
Yeah, I think what you said hits the nail on the head. Obviously, he had that big breakout sophomore year with the 24 home runs. Teams started walking him at times. But last year was, I wouldn't say a different Alex Terrell. We didn't get kind of the full slate to see if he was going to hit those 20-plus home runs again. But the plate discipline was incredible. He had 13 walks in 16 games. I think had like a 430 OBP. It was off the charts of how good he was, just being patient, waiting for his pitch. And then when he got his pitch, he had 5 home runs in those 16 games. So he was pretty good. I would expect, do I expect 24 home runs again? Probably not. I think that's hard to live up to in any college baseball season. Could we see upper teens to low 20s again? I think it's possible. I think it's hard to predict that. I think the biggest improvement, along with kind of progressing with that plate discipline, is on the defensive side. I don't think much offensively is going to jump out. Like, can he improve offensively? Of course, everyone can. But I think defensively is kind of where we're going to see the biggest improvements. We saw it a little last year, I guess as a junior or third year, whatever they're going to call it now. He was better defensively. I think there's still work to be done. And I'm sure from a personal perspective, that kid wants to win as much as anyone. He's stuck here this long. I'm sure he could have signed if he wanted to last year as an undrafted free agent, like plenty of guys in his spot could. He wants to win, but from a selfish perspective for him, in order to get drafted higher, he's got to improve his defense. I think that's no question. If not, major league teams are kind of going to look at him like a DH, which isn't going to help his draft stock at all. So I think defense is, I'm sure he's worked on it all offseason long, and that's kind of where I'm looking to see where he improves.
And kind of just real quick about that breakout season with all those home runs. I remember tracking that year, and he just did not have very many games where he didn't hit a home run. Like, his consistency was really good. Sometimes guys hit gaps, but where they're not producing. But I thought he did a good job of really that consistency, improving it throughout that year. And Josh, we could certainly go around all the way around the diamond. There's plenty to get to. I want to talk about maybe some breakout players. And I know you asked Coach Lopez about a couple guys, so maybe those will be guys that you'll pinpoint. But real quick, just some kind of an injury update. The biggest thing kind of going into the season is third baseman Raymond Gill. Will he be ready? And if you didn't pay attention, so Raymond I talked to him in the preseason. He ended up having a concussion in a car accident in the fall. Then he broke his leg on the first day of fall practice, slow roller up on a ground ball and tripped over the mound kind of thing. So he feels like, he's coming back. Coach Lopez called it full go, but basically it's just kind of a, feeling out process with Raymond. So if Raymond's not able to go, particularly in defensive, as a third baseman, he could be used as a DH, but basically some guys are going to need to move around and take a spot. Looks like Yohandy Morales could be that guy, a freshman shortstop, slide over to third base. Maybe Dominic Patelli moves in at short. There's a couple freshmen there, but Josh, just maybe some breakout players that you're looking at. Again, a lot of guys in the outfield returning, all 3 starters. Are there some breakout guys that you like, or are there some young guys, or who are some guys maybe you're looking at that you're very curious to see in this year?
I think Yohandy Morales is the easy pick just because he's going to play all the time. I'll get a little more creative than that just because of how highly touted he is. There's 2 guys that really caught my eyes as freshmen, and then there's one guy that I guess is now a second-year freshman, if you will. That's good. I think Adam Frank is going to play a large part on this team. We've heard so much about him, just of how good he is. Of course, the big thing you hear is that he's ambidextrous throwing the baseball, which you don't see every day. But he's hit at every level he's been at. I'm sure he's going to make that adjustment to the D1 level. It'll be interesting to see come Sunday when there's a lefty on the mound if Frank gets a start, because now Gino DeMario has all this flexibility and versatility. Will he play matchups? Will he play, the handedness of the pitcher? And will we see Frank in the infield or the outfield? He could play both. I think the other guy who I don't know if he's going to make as much of an impact this season unless guys don't hit, but I think he has a chance, is Chad Bourne. Was a freshman that they sang kind of his praises. Great defensive center fielder, and that's where I think the logjam is Tony Jenkins has that spot, you would imagine. So if maybe an outfielder doesn't hit, you might see Chad Bourne. But two guys that I guess are a little more experienced than those freshmen that I think are going to break out years. One is Jared Thomas. I wouldn't be surprised to see Miami try and find a way to get Thomas in the lineup. And it started to click a little more towards the end of last year, and it would have been nice to see him over a full schedule and then see summer ball and kind of see that progression. Obviously, he's probably not going to play much catcher other than spelling Del Castillo, maybe a midweek game or, a random off day here or there, whether it might be DH or whether in the outfield. I think Jared Thomas is poised for a breakout year. And then the other guy that I think, it almost seems so weird to say this, but Christian Del Castillo, obviously I don't expect him to be the level of Adrian, but a guy who has college baseball experience who they said has just been consistent. Adrian was joking, I don't know if it was yesterday or day before, but he was joking that Christian might be a better contact hitter than he is. And if he is even anywhere remotely close in that regard, he'll have a pretty good year. So I think those are kind of the guys that I'm looking at to have breakout seasons. And I guess from maybe not an offensive perspective, but a guy that might get considerable time is Dominic Patelli, just considering how good he is with the glove.
And with Patelli, if they really like his glove with the bats they have in the lineup, they can almost afford to have him not have that big offensive number if they really want to improve the defense. And Gino did talk about that quite a bit. And Patelli, I like the comment that Coach Lopez said, called him sneaky juice. So I like that. Maybe that'll emerge into a nickname with Patelli if he can show some pop. He did have 4 home runs. I looked at his high school stats, never hit over 300 in a season at Doral, but he did have 4 home runs as a sophomore. So, but anyways, it'll be his glove that gets him in the lineup if he can provide a little bit offensively. I'm very curious to see how this is going to work in terms of guys that returned. Jordan Lala, JP Gates are guys that didn't have great offensive numbers last year. If that happens again, I feel like they have options, if guys don't get off to good starts. I think Gabe Rivera is a guy that certainly hits it. He can get in hot streaks, but also he can go cold, and strikeouts can kind of pile up with him. And if the returners don't play well, or you mentioned Jenkins, if they don't play well, I think that they have options and they're going to give these guys opportunities. You mentioned Del Castillo, certainly a guy that could get an opportunity, and you kind of look around like, where are these going to, where are they going to fit in? You mentioned Adam Frank. He's a guy I've been told is kind of working at second and third, so he could certainly be an option. And you mentioned the outfield. So it's going to be very interesting to see how these guys all work out. And basically, how quick of a hook will Gino have on guys if they go through little mini slumps, or like you said, if they start on a Sunday, if guys aren't performing the first 2 games, even in just one series. So it'll be very interesting to see how things work out. I think Tony Jenkins, when you talk about breakout guys, for me, I feel like you're still wanting to see a little bit more. I like the improvement we saw last year as OPS goes up, that continued improvement with that OPS number, being that full-time guy, and they really like his defense. So certainly he'll get a chance to stay in there at center field. But certainly a lot of guys, Josh, that could perform and kind of have big years. I do think that's going to be a good offensive club. I like the amount of returners, and you mentioned kind of these key spots with the talented young guys mixing in. Chad Bourne certainly seems like a guy that could, he'll do well if he gets that opportunity. So opportunities will kind of be the key. And when they get them, I mean, these guys, whoever it is, however old they are, when they're in there, they've got to hit and hit well and kind of stay in the lineup. And I think that'll be the interesting thing to watch for. Going against Florida for the opening series, the way to start the season, certainly everybody knows Miami struggles against Florida. If they can have any sort of success this weekend, and Florida's a team that returns essentially all their guys, and all, they're starting pitching, their top 2 guys have faced Miami the last 3 years, either out of the bullpen or in the starting rotation. So Miami certainly is well aware of these guys. So I'm very curious to see if Miami can make some adjustments or kind of hit well. What are you kind of seeing this weekend against Florida, and maybe some keys for Miami to win the series?
Well, you mentioned they returned practically everyone. I think on the mound is probably their strength. Just when you look at, again, we don't have an official rotation. I would imagine they're going to go with the same three, probably in the same order they had last year: Tommy Mace, Jack Leftwich, and Hunter Barco. I think three arms that are proven, three of them that have had success against Miami too. I think it's a no-brainer in that regard for them. I think it all starts on the mound for them. Tommy Mace and Jack Leftwich were both guys that, in a normal year would not be back. I think it was more than a 5-round draft. Even if it was, a 10-round draft, they both probably would have gone. So I think Florida, is singing their praises and happy that they get those two guys back. I think Hunter Barco might be the best arm in that rotation from a potential standpoint. He was his first weekend start of his career against Miami last year. He pitched pretty well. He's got a nasty breaking ball. So I think on the mound, that's kind of where it starts for them. They have a deep bullpen once again. Their lineup maybe isn't as intimidating as we've seen in the past. I really like their shortstop, Josh Rivera. He had a good freshman campaign last year, had a good series against Miami. The guy who really stood out to me last year in that series was Jacob Young, who doesn't get a lot of recognition nationally, but he did all the little things right, which was huge. And of course, they have a projected first-round pick in that lineup with Judd Fabian. And I think that'll be the interesting thing to watch this weekend is Del Castillo versus Fabian, arguably the two best hitters in this draft class, and kind of how that shakes out. But I think this series is going to be won on the mound and who does the little things right. It almost came down to that last year. Miami had some leads in a bunch of those games. And, if they took care of the little things, they didn't throw the ball around, they might have won a game or two. And I think you're going to see an emphasis on that this weekend for sure. You won't see guys making silly throws. You'll see teams try and take extra bases, but, try and throw it to the right bag accordingly. And those things, especially when you get two high-level teams, can be the difference.
Josh, definitely, man, there's a lot to talk about with this team. Hopefully we could do this again. I definitely appreciate taking the time. And I know you're going up to Gainesville for all 3 games. You're going to be calling out on WVUM. So definitely looking forward to your updates. Where can people get more updates from you, either on the team or anything regards to Miami Hurricanes?
Well, they can catch everything on Twitter at _ Josh R. White. Updates, not just baseball, but you mentioned football, basketball, whatever it might be. And then, obviously feel free to tune into the game. It's on SEC Network on Friday, so most people probably get that, but then it's SEC Network Plus Saturday and Sunday, so probably a little more limited. You can watch 90.5 FM on the or listen rather 90.5 FM on the radio in the South Florida area, and then worldwide on WVUM.org. There's a giant listen now button. You click that, and you'll kind of see a scoreboard pop up as the game's going on, so you'll know a game's going on. So 3 p.m. on Friday, 1 p.m. Saturday, 1 p.m. on Sunday.
Yeah, it's going to be great times. I enjoy those afternoon games, especially Friday. That'll be fun. Definitely looking forward to the season. Definitely appreciate you once again for talking about the Miami Hurricanes baseball team. Plenty to talk about, plenty to be excited about if you're a Canes fan. I think this team has a good shot at making that College World Series run that you were looking forward to last year. All is not lost. There's a lot of good talent on the team, a lot of exciting young talent, a lot of guys that will be high draft picks if they have that career that you're expected. So thanks again. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you, Josh, and take care.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Cool, man.